Kairis, ikaw na lang natitira sa section nyo, no?
Opo.
And then, ayan, sige. Jessa, hindi ka pa anak nakakakuha ng card, no? Hindi mo pa natitingnan. Si Bea, okay na.
Yes
Hindi
po,
pa lang
ma'am.
nakakapirma. Okay. So, let's start now with our session for this morning. Actually, dalawa. Hindi ko pala napalitan ng aking name. Dadalawa lang po yung module natin for this morning. Kaya medyo mabilis tayo. Mabilis. So, kung mabilis, pwede nyo na rin mamayang sagutan ang pre-test. And at the same time, yung learning task 3 and 4. Okay po? Yan. So, to start with, let me share with you my presentation. Sobrang dali lang ng tayo. It's actually more on definition of terms. Na-encounter niyo na ba sa sa research ninyo ang testing hypothesis, mga anak? Yan. Okay. Wala. Okay. So, kaya ko tinatanong sa inyo because the first module is about testing hypothesis. Okay? So, at the end of this session, you're expected to define and illustrate the null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis, the level of significance, rejection region, and the types of errors in hypothesis testing. So, it's more on the definition lang talaga. Okay? And then, ipapakita lang natin kung saan ba siya with the normal curve, saan siya papasok. Okay? And then the second objective is to identify the rejection region and the non-rejection region and the critical values. So when we say non-rejection, it's actually the acceptance region. Kasi kung yung smaller part is the rejection region, then the other region in the normal curve is the acceptance region. And lastly, you need to differentiate what type 1 and type 2 errors are. Okay? So ano ba yung pinagkaiba ng dalawa? So napakahalaga ng hypothesis testing natin. Okay, and to start, I have here learning task number 2, and it says here, according to a survey, the average daily usage of social media worldwide of global internet users amount to 142 minutes per day. Sophia conducts her own survey among her friends to find out if their time spent on social media is significantly higher than the global survey. And before the survey, she formulated the following claims. Claim A, that the average daily usage of social media of her friends is the same as the global average usage. So remember that the global average usage is 142 minutes per day. And that with claim B, the average daily usage of social media of her friends is higher than the global average usage. Okay? So, tingnan natin. So ito po yung na-survey niya sa kanyang mga friends. Yan, yung nasa table natin, ay yung lumabas. And then with this, question number 1. So what do you think is or the statistical data needed to prove which of Sophia's claims is accepted or rejected? So remember that she has 2 claims, di ba? One is that, ano yun? The daily usage of her friends are equal or is equal to the global usage. And then with the second claim, higher daw, greater than daw yun. Okay? So ano kaya yung sa palagay ninyo na kailangan nating hanapin just to prove na yung claim niya ay kailangan i-accept or i-reject? Anybody?
Find the mean.
Sino po yung umimik? Si Aram?
Yes po.
Si Frias. Ayan, so Frias. Okay. So what made you decide na find the mean? Ano yung clue word natin doon?
Yung pong average
Yan. So thank you, Frias. So since it talks of on the average, ibig sabihin, kailangan nating kunin ang mean just to claim lang po, para ma-claim natin whether we have to reject or to accept yung claim ni Sofia. Okay? So second question. What is the average daily usage of social media of her friends? So paano natin kukunin yung daily usage nung social media ng friends ni Sofia? Daphne,
Ano po, add and divide po.
alin ang i-add natin?
Add po natin yung minutes per day po
Ayan,
ng
sige
mga
anak,
friends
may
niya. Tapos
calculator
divide
ka
po
ba
dun
sa
sa
tabi mo?
number of friends.
Anak, may calculator ka sa tabi mo. Kindly add.
Meron po.
Sige anak, paki-compute. Sa una natin ay mean. Tapos titingnan natin kung anong magiging computation ni Daphne. What is the average daily usage of social media of her friends?
Ano po, 152 po.
152. So nakuha ni Daphne po yung average daily usage of social media by adding 132 plus 148 plus 165 up to 173, then divided by 10. Ano, Daphne? Tama ba?
Yes po.
Yan. And as we compare that with the previous average usage, remember na ano yung global? Global
142 po.
usage is 142, tama? So basically, what kind of mean is this 152? Is this the
Higher po.
is this the sample mean or the population mean? Itong 152 na nakuha ni Daphne, ano kaya yan? Population mean or sample mean?
Sample mean po.
Ayan, thank you. Si Ate Alec ba yung umimik?
Apa.
O ba, nag-concert ka ba, Ate Alec? Ayan. And then yung 142 is actually the population mean. Ano po? So you know naman the symbol for sample mean and the population mean. Tama ba ako? Ina-assume ko nang alam nyo ha. Pag yung population mean, it's the mu. And then sa sample mean, yung may X bar natin. Ayan. So makikita ninyo that the sample mean is higher than the population mean by just comparing the value. But it's not enough to say that if the mean of one is higher than the other, then automatically siya na yung mataas. Okay po? Kasi pagdating natin sa hypothesis testing, meron pa yan nakasunod na kailangan nating gawin. Okay? So let's have question number 3. Which of the two claims could probably be true? Is it the sample mean or the population mean? So later we'll try to find it out kung alin ba talaga yung totoo. Ano? Na mas mataas sa kanila or what? Okay? So medyo erase ko na and then we'll proceed with question number 4. With question number 4, natin. If Sophia computed the average daily internet usage of her friends to be higher than the global survey, do you think it would be significantly higher? So ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo na it's not enough that you know the mean. Okay? Nakita natin mas mataas yung mean nung coming from the sample than the population mean. So meron tayong kailangan gamitin pa para ma-prove na mas mataas talaga yung mean nung sa friends niya or nung sa global. Okay? And then fifth question, what is your idea of an average value being significantly higher than the global average value? Di ba sabi natin the average value or the mean is a measure of central tendency. And sa statistics kasi, there are two types. The descriptive and the inferential. Usually, if you will just deal with the measures of central tendency, the measures of variability, kasama lang siya sa descriptive. Ano po? It just describe. It's just a value that will describe the performance of the group. Pero, since medyo malalim ngayon yung kailangan natin gawin, kaya nga testing hypothesis, we need to deal with an inferential statistics. Okay? So gagamit pa tayo ng another test dyan. Okay? And then last question, what do you think is the difference between simple comparison of data and hypothesis testing? Ano nga ba talaga ang pinagkaiba? Kasi sa simple comparison, it's just a mere computation. Sa hypothesis testing, medyo level up tayo because we will try to compare it up with something before tayo magkaroon ng conclusion. Okay? Kaya napakahalaga ng topic natin ngayon na testing hypothesis. But anyways, can I ask somebody from the group, ano ba talaga pag sinabi nating testing hypothesis or hypothesis testing? Anybody?
Ma'am,
Yes, Aram. Aram, parang
ano po?
nag-uuli ka ba?
Ay, hindi po ma'am. Maingay lang po talaga dito sa may amin. Nasa tindahan po ako.
Ah, okay.
Ano po? Testing the hypothesis ma'am ay ano po tawag ito? Kasi ang alam ko, pag iti-test mo yung hypothesis, i-check, i-verify mo whether yung claim mo or nung study mo ay tama.
How?
Ano po? Mostly, meron naman po talagang mga pang-test ng hypothesis, especially if null hypothesis yung iti-test mo.
Yan. So parang familiar na kayo dito, no? Na-discuss na sa inyo sa research?
Opo.
Yan. Ay di uwi na, hindi ko na i-discuss.
Di po revisiting.
Okay, so joke lang. So yun nga, sabi nga ni Aram, di ba, we need to use a statistical treatment just to prove that our claim is really true or not. Okay po? So since may nabanggit na siya about null hypothesis at alam nyo na naman yan, di ba? So i-revisit lang natin what really hypothesis testing mean. Okay? So when we say hypothesis testing or testing hypothesis, it is a statistical method applied in making decisions using experimental data. Yan, medyo mag-experiment na tayo kung alin ba talaga, may mga gagamitin nga tayong statistical treatment na yun na nga yung titingnan natin. Siyempre, actually, sinimulan na natin last time kung natatandaan nyo yung gamit ng z-test and t-test. So, yan yung pinakamababaw pa lang na statistical treatment na pwede natin gamitin when it comes to inferential statistics. Okay? And then, of course, when we will try to test hypothesis, we need to have a hypothesis. Okay? So actually dun sa case kanina ni Sophia, yung two claims niya, claims A and claim A and claim B are actually the hypothesis. Ano po? And when we say hypothesis, it's actually a proposed explanation, assertion, or assumption about the population parameter or about the distribution of a random variable. Okay? Di ba sa science, may hypothesis din kayong ginagamit, especially pag nag-experiment kayo, di ba? Okay. So, nabanggit ni Aram kanina na merong null hypothesis. Yan. So, there are two kinds of hypothesis. We have the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. So, same ba yung notation na ginagamit sa research ninyo? Sa null hypothesis kasi it's H sub O, while alternative is H sub A. In some other books, it's H sub 0 and H sub 1. Parehas lang ba?
Amin po 8 sub 0 tapos H sub 1.
Yan. Ang H sub 1 is alternative, Yan. Pero same lang naman yon. So usually naman sa math, ganun Notations lang yung nababago. But the meaning of that is the same. Kasi when we say null hypothesis, you will state your claim na there's no significant difference. Pero pagka may difference sila, it's alternative hypothesis. Okay po? Yan, yung notation natin. Okay. So, balikan natin yung kay Sophia na claim. Okay. So, how will you classify claim A? Is this alternative hypothesis or null hypothesis? Jessa, anak? Claim A, that the average daily usage of social media for friends is the same as the global average usage. Is this null hypothesis or alternative hypothesis, Jessa? Ate LJ. Sophia.
Ang understanding ko po ng null hypothesis ay pag may nakalagay na there is no, kaya hindi ka po sure.
Ano anak?
Ang understanding ko po ng null hypothesis ay pag may nakalagay, halimbawa na there is no significant blah blah blah. Kaya hula lang po ako. Siguro po ay null hypothesis.
Null hypothesis is your answer?
Opo.
Yan, that's correct. Si Ate Jujay ba to?
Hindi niyo po ba ako tinawag?
Sophia.
Sophia po.
Ayan, Sophia. Yan, di ba? So this is an example of a null hypothesis. So, there are a lot of ways. So wag kayong mag-i-stick dun sa idea na kapag ka sinabing null hypothesis, lagi lang, there is no significant difference lang yung way ng pag-i-state niya. So kailangan ninyong makita na sa hypothesis ninyo, as long as yung thought niya or yung gusto niyang message na i-relay ay no difference, it's still a null hypothesis. So just like yung claim A niya, kasi di ba sabi niya dito, we are trying to compare the average daily usage nung sa friends niya with that of the global. So yun yung dalawang kino-compare natin, and yung ating word dito na is the same as, ibig sabihin, there is no significant difference. Ano po? So kaya wag laging yun yung titingnan ninyo. So as long as yung statement ay hindi nagpapakita ng difference or kung alin yung mas mataas or kung alin yung mas mababa, or if you are trying to compare two populations na in symbols, ganyan lang po siya, yan, it's still a null hypothesis. Nagkakaintindihan mga anak?
Apo.
Okay, Jana, how about claim B? How will you classify claim B? Play.
Po.
How will you classify claim B? Is it alternative hypothesis, null hypothesis, or any other kind of hypothesis na alam mo?
Alternative po.
Okay, so what made you decide that this is an alternative hypothesis?
Kasi po may difference po dun sa sa dalawa. Sabi
Yan, di ba? Alin yung naging clue mo?
higher po than the
Yan,
global
is
average.
higher than. So, ibig sabihin, merong isa, yung average daily usage ng friends niya is higher than the global, which is really true kapag titingnan lang natin yung value nila, di ba? Kasi ang value nung sa friends niya, 152, sa global is 142. Okay po? Yan. So, those are the two kinds of hypotheses. May question po doon? Okay, so let's have another term, the level of significance. How do we denote level of significance? Anong ginagamit nating notation?
Alpha po.
Ano daw po?
Alpha.
Yan. Yun. O, hindi ko na masyadong ibibigay. Si JM ba yun? Yan. So kapag ka may alpha, it's the level of significance or the degree of significance in which we will try to accept or reject the null hypothesis. If we have the normal curve, yan. So usually, ini-state, halimbawa, the level of significance can be 0.01, 0.05, 0.025, yan. So pag nilagay natin sa curve natin, yan, the 0.05 or the 5% level of significance, ito lang po yun. Okay? And then, it can be a one-tailed test or a two-tailed test. Pag sinabi natin one-tailed test, katulad ng claim kanina ni Sophia, di ba yung alternative hypothesis niya is greater than. Okay, go Aram. 1% na lang daw ang kanyang. Di ba pag sinabi natin yung kanina, yung is greater than the global daily usage. So it's a one-tailed test kasi pinakita lang natin na mas mataas yung isa. Or kung gagamitin nyo din yung is less than, it's still a one-tailed test. Ano po? Pero kailan siya naging two-tailed test? Naging two-tailed test siya kapag ka in-state ninyo yung alternative hypothesis na not equal to. Yan. So yun po ang basis natin ha. Pag sa graph natin, so this is an example of one-tailed test. Pag sinabi naman natin two-tailed test, yan, magkakaroon ka din dito sa kabila. Yan. Kung ano man yung area mo doon, yun din yun. Diba? The 0.05 level of significance. Yan. Yan po pag sinabi natin sa level of significance na one-tailed test or two-tailed test. Kasi kung nakapag-research kayo ng tabular value ng t-test, meron dong mga tables na nakalagay na one-tailed test, may nakalagay na two-tailed test, or whatsoever. Ano po? Yan. Kulang ulit. So let's proceed with the next slide. Yan. So katulad nga nito, yan. Ang titingnan lang natin lagi sa sa level of significance is the alternative hypo ha. Since ito ay higher than, so this is an example of a one-tailed test. Yan. So walang pakialam si null hypothesis. Pagdating sa level of significance niya, if it is one-tailed or two-tailed. So ang laging titingnan lang lagi ay alternative hypothesis. Pagka in-state ang alternative hypothesis na the average daily usage of social media per friends is not equal to, then it's a two-tailed test. Ano po? Pag naman siya ay the average daily usage of social media per friends is less than the global average usage, still it's a one-tailed test. So whether you use higher than or greater than or less than is lower than, it's a one-tailed test. Pero pag ang ginamit ay not equal to, then it's a two-tailed test na. Okay? Next term to remember. Yeah. We have the rejection or critical region and the non-rejection or the acceptance region. Okay po? So rejection, syempre, yan yung portion ng curve na kailangan nating i-reject. While the non-rejection region is the portion of the curve where we have to accept. Okay? So sa graph natin, ito po yan. Okay? So kung halimbawa, two-tailed test ang ginamit ninyo, kung 0.05 yung level of significance, so this is 0.025, this is 0.025. Siyempre, two-tailed test daw yun eh. So ito yung rejection region, yung magkabila, and then this is the acceptance region. Di ba pag sinabi natin rejection region, is actually yung percentage na inaalat natin na magkakamali tayo. So if we are medyo sure, pwedeng 1% na level of significance lamang or depende sa inyo, di ba? Yan. So this is the acceptance region. Ganyan po yung region natin siya. Okay, and then the critical value actually is the tabular value. So it is a point or boundary in the test distribution that is compared to the test statistic to determine if the null hypothesis would be rejected. So itong area na rejection region can be found actually from the table. So if you will use the T table or the Z table, whatever is the value na makikita ninyo doon, yun yung area na ilalagay ninyo dito. Syempre, ano po? Yan. Yun din yung tinatawag na critical value. The critical value or the tabular value. Kasi the hypothesis for you to decide whether to reject or to accept is that you have to compare that critical value to that of the computed value. Okay? Yan. So, kunyari, ito, di ba, dun sa, kay Sofia kanina, yung population mean is 142, the sample mean is 152. Then, kunyari, na-compute na natin that the standard deviation is 19.855. And the N is equal to 10. Remember, di ba, sa t-test, we need to compute for the degrees of freedom then. Degrees of freedom, the df equals n minus 1. So, ibig sabihin, ang degrees of freedom niya is 10 minus 1 equals 9. So, mahalaga po yan. Bakit? Kasi gagamitin natin siya mamaya pagdating sa tabular value natin. So, if this will be the case, since, di ba sabi natin, to Z or not to Z. Kapag ka ang sample, sample size mo is less than 30, just as the case of Sophia na ang N lang natin is 10, it's not to Z. Kaya ang gagamitin natin ay t-test. Ano po? T-test ang gagamitin natin. So kung t-test, yung formula natin, yan po siya. Sinubstitute natin yung mga given and then ang naging tabular value natin, the computed, sorry. So this is the computed, ano po? Okay, computed value natin ito. Then saan natin siya i-compare? Siyempre sa critical value or sa tabular value. Saan natin makikita yon? Yan. So this is the table of the t-test. So ang degrees of freedom natin, dito natin makikita is 9. Yan. 9, nasaan ka? 9. And then, the level of significance natin is 0.05. It's a one-tailed test. Yan. So, nasaan ang intersection nila? Anong value yung intersection? It's the 1.833. Yan. Okay. So, kung 1.833, pag nilagay na natin siya sa graph, tingnan natin yung graph, ha? Yan. So, one-tailed test lang siya. Ang ating computed somewhere here. So, medyo napalayo lang yun, ha? If this is 1, 1.5, mga nandito. Si 1.593. Yan. Tapos, sa table natin, ng degrees of freedom na 9 at 0.05 level of significance, it's 1.833. Ay, what happened? Yan, 1.833. So, anong ibig sabihin yan? Clearly, that the computed value, di ba? Ito yon, computed value, 1.5983. ay hindi pa part nung sa rejection region natin. So that means we need to accept the null hypothesis. Diba? And what's the null hypothesis? That the average daily usage of her friends is the same as the global internet usage. So yun yung sinasabi ko sa inyo kanina na hindi porket naging mas malaki si 152 kay 142 ay makoconclude na natin agad na higher siya. No, it's not. So since sa hypothesis natin na the same lang sila, yan. So clearly with the hypothesis testing na ginawa natin, totoo na equal lang sila. Hindi mataas yung isa, hindi mababa yung isa. Okay po? Yan. So ganyan po yung pagte-test natin. Yes po.
Paano po yung naging 0.05 po?
Ano anak?
Yung pong sa 0.05 po.
Binigay natin, binigay lang natin. Sa problem kasi binibigay yun eh. Ini-state yung level of significance.
Okay po, ma'am. Thank you po.
Ibibigay talaga yun lagi. Yung level of significance. Okay po? Depende yun ha, depende. Hindi laging 0.05. So ito naman yung titingnan ninyo kung ano yung ibibigay na level of significance. Nandiyan lang sa taas yung pwedeng pamilian. Okay, another term. Hindi pala to. Ito yon. Ito yung summary nung kung paano tayo nag-accept or nagre-reject ng ating null hypothesis. So when the computed value, t-value, is less than the critical value or the tabular value, then accept the null hypothesis. Otherwise, reject the null hypothesis. Kapag naging mas mataas naman ang computed value ninyo than the tabular value, then you need to reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis. Diba? Ganun lang po yun ha. So again, if the tabular value, t-computed pala, sorry. T computed is less than or equal to the T tabular reject the null hypothesis. Accept the null ano ba yan? Accept the null hypothesis. But if the T computed dito yata merong equal to. I-verify ko lang is greater than the T tabular, then reject the null hypothesis. Ito ang i-reject natin ang null. Correct ko lang po, eraser. Yan, less than, ito dito, greater than or equal to. Yan. Yan po yung kailangan yung tandaan. When to accept or reject the null hypothesis. Okay po tayo doon? Okay, so let's continue. Another one, we have the type 1 error and the type 2 error. Ano bang pinagkaiba ng dalawa? Yan. When you reject the null hypothesis, when in fact it's true, then you have the alpha error or the type 1 error. Okay? But if you need to accept the null hypothesis when in fact it's false, then it's a beta error. So katulad sa case natin kanina, it's a beta error kasi inaccept natin ang null hypothesis. Okay po? So kung i-compare natin sa graph, ganyan lang po yan. Yan. The type 1 or the alpha error and the type 2, it's the beta error. Yan. In summary, ito po yun. Okay? So if the null hypothesis is true and nasa na yun? You need to reject it, it's a type 1 error. Okay? But if the null hypothesis is false, it's a type 2 error where you need to accept the null hypothesis. Okay po yun? Kapag inaccept ang null hypothesis, it's a beta error or type 2 error. If you reject the null hypothesis, it's a type 1 or alpha error. Okay? So let's proceed with the second module. Yan. Identifying parameters. Alam nyo na to? Diba? When we say parameters, coming from the population, coming from the sample, it's statistic. You know the different notation used for parameters? Diba? The different symbols. Ayan. Kapag mean, X bar sa statistic, variance, S squared, S sa standard deviation, and then the fat, P na may hat, yan, proportion po yun. Kapag ang binigay sa problem ay mga percentage, it's proportion. So these are the symbols used kapag coming from the samples. Kapag coming from the population, ito naman yung symbols na ginagamit natin, na lahat ang tawag natin doon ay parameter. Okay? So katulad dito sa example natin, the average height of adult Filipinos 20 years and older is 163 centimeters for males. So average height of adult Filipinos. So ibig sabihin, it's coming from the sample. So your parameter is the average height of adult Filipinos 20 years and older is 163. So the symbol 163, mu. Okay? Second example, a grade 11 researcher reported that the average allowance of senior high school is 100. So what is this? The population mean. Diba? Mu equals 100. Then what else? What is this 120? Yan, the sample mean. 120. The N coming from the sample is 40. The level of significance, alpha, is 0.01. Ano pa mga given? Yun lang. Ayan, SD pala. Standard deviation of the population. SD is 50. So those are the notations na kailangan alam ninyo in identifying the parameters in a given problem. Okay po? May tanong po tayo doon?
Wala po.
Yan. So ganun lang po yun na. Let's proceed with learning task number 3. Translate it. Okay. So ito po yun. Yan. So you need to use the different notations and then you have to find the value of that dito. And then what symbol to be used based on the parameters given and then kung ano yung value. Notation lang. Halimbawa, ang given dito sa parameter natin ay standard deviation. So you need to use the symbol sigma. Diba? If it is greater than or less than or equal to, ayan. So ito po yung ating maging symbol dyan. And then kung ano yung value niya base dito. So yung value po ay dito nilalagay ha. Yung notation base dun sa given, sa mga parameters natin, dito ilalagay. Then symbol, and then the value. Okay po? And then learning task number 4, need to answer this. So that's all for this week. Just the 2 modules on testing hypothesis and identifying the parameters. Any other question?
None po.
Thank you so much. So kung wala na po tayong tanong, stop sharing na po ako. And then your attendance.